So you should see the presentation. Did it come up? Okay, good. Good to know. All right. Let's see. So my name is Kimberly Ramseur, as Charlene said, and FYI, I do have a dog, and she's not camera shy, so every now and then she likes to make her debut, of course, while I am speaking. So just wanted to put you on notice, but it is what it is during the times. So my name is Kimberly Ramseur. I do work for Hemophilia Federation of America, where I am the Senior Manager for Policy and Advocacy there. And I want to thank you guys for having me tonight to speak on advocacy issues, specifically within North Carolina. So I just want to get started. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about mainly is because right now we're going through a crazy, crazy time. And so general advocacy and virtual advocacy, essentially the same thing. So we have a lot of definitions as to what is advocacy. And so one of the things that I noticed when Jillian sent the invitation out, that the definition was, one that she used was the act or pleading for, supporting, or recommending. And then I had a couple others to go with it. And in any of those, there's definitely more, but the one thing that remains the same is that general advocacy is the same as virtual advocacy. So if we do it in person or we do it online, it's the same thing. You know, you just have to adapt to the changes, but we can still advocate from home. So what's really changed since COVID-19? Other than not being able to meet in person, not really much when it comes to advocacy. So you still can make phone calls, you can text, you can send emails, you can mail your legislators or congressmen if you want to, you can connect via social media. You know, now more than ever, we've seen a robust amount of people taking an approach to using social media where they would not have used it before. And, you know, I've seen so many TikTok videos, and I'm still waiting to see, you know, the congressman or a legislator make TikTok debut. Doing things like meeting now, a lot of town hall meetings are being held online, whereas before they would have been held in person, or where, you know, typically we have our legislative days in person, but now we will be having them online. So other than not being able to meet in person, you know, not much has changed. And so one of the other benefits to this is, like you see, we're on the call tonight, and then some of us have our children, some of us have our pets, some of us have other things that we're doing. We're meeting in bedrooms, we're meeting in the bathroom, the garage, the basement. It's really less formal. So it takes away a lot of the stress and the nerves, you know, that we tend to have when we get dressed up and we go down to the Capitol. So it makes for good stories, and it makes for a very good experience sometimes. So one of the things that you can do while you're sheltered at home or changing up your advocacy approach, which is improving your advocacy efforts right now. So one of the things that we've done in the past and still are doing now is working with other organizations to improve upon our advocacy and networking techniques. So this will be the time to research other organizations that may have similar interests as you, connecting, of course, via social media, contacting them, researching what they do, and figuring out how can you work together, especially on shared interests. I do have an example on the screen of one of the partnerships that we have coming up with HFA, NHF, as well as NORD, that we'll be doing later on this year. And of course, last year, I believe it was when agency did have their advocacy day or their Capitol day with NORD. So those are just, you know, a few examples of how you can partner with other organizations and network and build your coalitions while we're in times like this. So I did also want to touch on some of the issues that we were monitoring prior to coronavirus, and still now, even though they're not priorities right now. So one of them being step therapy in North Carolina, which was Bill HB 450, which came out last year. And the accumulator adjustment programs, we've talked about those before and how not beneficial they are for our community and really for a lot of individuals. bills such as those with SB 432 and HB 179. And essentially what that bill would do is requiring cost sharing paid on behalf of the patients to the insurance company to be counted towards those deductibles. And the same thing for the step therapy bill, which would establish protocols to be in place so that when you are put on a particular product by your provider or physician, that it stays that way, and so that your insurer or your payer doesn't come in and try to direct your care and say what you should be on when your healthcare provider is the expert as to your care and no one else. Surprise billing, SB 386, has been a huge issue, not just for North Carolina. Across the United States is an issue that has gone all the way up to Congress, as well as accumulator adjuster programs and step therapy protocols as well. There was a bill that came out last year, SB 386, and I would like to mention that between these bills and the other ones that I mentioned, they have not passed. They were just introduced last year, but these are definitely things that we could still advocate for going forward, and even now. Medicaid expansion definitely has been an issue and a hot debated topic that we've talked about before in the state of North Carolina. One bill specifically being HB 655, has not passed, but during these times, we've also seen how Medicaid has been beneficial or could be beneficial to resolving a lot of issues when it comes to care. We've seen a lot of families lose coverage, health insurance coverage due to losing their jobs. And so if we were a state that had expanded our Medicaid coverage, we'd be able to pick up those families that did lose that coverage. Right before this call, maybe a few weeks ago, that was going to be something that was discussed when the legislature came back into session. We believed it was going to be added to the final package. It was not. But a lot of what we found is that sometimes with the issue, especially now, one, it was going to be specifically tailored toward coronavirus issues, covering screening and maybe even patient care after that as well. And it was only going to be temporary, but it's a start. So even if we were to get that passed right now, just seeing the benefits of what we could get under that expansion and making the case for how we should continue with it going forward. Unfortunately, like I said, it was not, the language was not included in the bill that actually did pass, but again, it's been talked about, and we will definitely keep talking about it before, as we have Senator Jackson on the line as well, who could speak to it better than I can. But those are just a few of the issues specifically that are going on here that were being discussed before COVID-19, and still, again, like I said, can be discussed going forward. So I also had a few frequently asked questions that we've had to come up and that I wanted to cover on here just in case you were going to ask them, or, that I could just go ahead and answer. So we've had a few questions. How do I advocate for non-COVID related issues, or even is it possible right now? Because we did have that question come up on another call before. We like to tell people that it is still possible to advocate for non-COVID-19 related issues, but right now you have to understand that the current pandemic is the priority right now, and how do you address those issues? So being mindful of what's going on, but definitely as we've had issues before coronavirus, our issues did not go away just because it did come. So it is okay to still advocate for those issues, but being mindful of what is going on, and also know that just because you ask for it now, it doesn't mean that it's going to be a priority for this year. It may take some time, but it's a good way to start up a conversation and then follow up later on. The next one, how do I find out if my state legislative session has adjourned, suspended, or postponed? The best way to find that out is go directly to the source. The legislature has their own page. They update it quite frequently. So if you want to know what's going on, it's just best to go directly to their page. If you're on social media, you can definitely follow your state leaders as well. Follow all the information, on those pages as well. What resources can I use to find out what actions my state has taken to address COVID-19 related issues? again, I would say the best place to go is to your state legislature, their web page, which will provide you all of that information. If you don't want to go there for some reason, there are other groups that have compiled this information. If you want to know something that's going on in South Carolina or Virginia or Tennessee, I like to use the NCSL page, which is the National Conference for State Legislatures, where they go and use the same information that we have. They go directly to the state page, and they compile all this information together, and they update it quite frequently. So if you want to see what's going on in North Carolina, COVID-19 related bills that have been introduced or passed or pending, you can go directly there. If you want to know what's going on in another state, they have that information as well. So I know we said we're going to hold off for questions, but if someone wants to add a question in the chat, I am more than happy to answer that. But if not, that is the end of my part. If you have any questions where you don't have any right now or you have some later, feel free to reach out to me personally. Here's my email, and definitely feel free to reach out to the entire advocacy team at HFA, and we're more than happy to assist you in any way we can. All right.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. And Nathan, I think I made you a co-host, so you should be good to share your screen.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for having me. And I'm going to talk about some general advocacy best practices and sort of the state of where things are given advocacy efforts in 2020. So I'm Nathan Schaefer. I work for the National Hemophilia Foundation. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy, and I'm also one of 3 people that work on the state policy team for NHF. So I live in New York City, so I know none of you are envious of me right now. I've been working from home since March 10th, and it is creepy out here. So be glad and stay where you are. But I'm lucky to work with many states and chapters on the East Coast, including North Carolina, and I've been your state liaison for the past 4.5 years that I've been at NHF now. And it's been a lot of fun working with all of you. So here's the status of state advocacy days. I just wanted to give you some context and let you know that you're in good company with many other chapters that are encountering the reality that they're going to have to find a way to engage with virtual advocacy. There were a number of states, as you can see, that were able to get their advocacy days in. Most state advocacy days typically occur between February and April. And I think that's really for 2 reasons. One, March is Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month, so it's a really natural tie for an advocacy messaging. It also typically coincides with when states are working on and finalizing their budgets. So for a lot of chapters that need resources from their state budgets, they need to get in the earlier part of the legislative session. So we did have, up until the very first week in March, South Carolina, I think was March 3rd, was the last one that I was able to make it to. Everything else that you don't see on the list here, people are going virtual. And there has been some advocacy programming like this that have occurred, I know in Colorado, in the New England region, and now here. I don't know, I was telling Charlene and Jillian this, I think this morning, but I don't know of any other state that is going to have such a concerted effort like you all will on your day. So I'm really excited to help out and see how all of that goes. There are plans to have something similar in Alabama and Massachusetts, but their plans have not materialized as far along as yours has. So congrats on being where you are. And Ohio is the one that I know of that is planning to do, at least at this point, something in September. This is really, if you've heard me talk about this before, feel free to go and get a drink of water or something, but this is what I like to tell advocates who are brand new to advocacy. Because the reality is talking to a legislator is really no different than talking to a neighbor or a stranger that you meet in the course of your daily life, and they don't know much about hemophilia or bleeding disorders. So these are the things that I tell people to just think about by way of starting to tell your story. How did you get diagnosed? So many families get the diagnosis during circumcision or during the heel prick. That says a lot about the reality of caring for a baby with a severe bleeding disorder. And if that were the case, what were the first things that you needed to learn? And if you got connected to a hemophilia treatment center, how did that connection happen and why did it happen? And why are you still connected to your chapter? And why did you want to talk to your elected official? And it can be as simple as, I wanted to make sure you knew that you had a constituent that has a bleeding disorder in the event that you have a question about a bleeding disorder throughout your career. And I'll talk more about making connections with legislators because you really want to make yourself a resource to a legislative office. And the final thing I encourage you to think about is, what are you most afraid of? A lot of families are really afraid of developing an inhibitor. A lot of families are worried that the product that they've had success on will no longer be as successful, or that they won't have access to the product that they have now, or get access to a product that they desire. We all know that new products are always becoming available. So those are some of the things that I think keep families up at night and should be something you should think about incorporating in your story. So tips for connecting with legislators: always Google them and make sure, I know you're going to be doing virtual advocacy for the foreseeable future, but I've been in meetings before where people will go into a members of Congress office and be talking to the member of Congress, but didn't realize that was the member of Congress. So you need to know what they look like. So look them up. And are they on social media? At this point, I can say with 90% certainty, everybody's on social media in one form or another, and I'll talk about the various platforms momentarily. When you have meetings with legislators, even if they're going to be phone calls or Zoom meetings, they will be brief, typically 10 to 15 minutes. So keep in mind, you need to know what you want to say and what you want to say in what order, because it will go really quickly. And just be clear and informative, make your point. You really won't have time to go into too much detail unless they ask you questions. That's a golden scenario. If they're trying to learn more, by all means, engage them. Like I said, your goal here is to make a connection. If they ask you a question and you don't know the answer, say, I don't know, but I'll find out and I'll get back to you. That allows you to then go and get the comprehensive response to the question and come back to them with reliable information. That helps them out to be a better advocate on behalf of you and your family. So if you say you're going to follow up with something, by all means do it. And if you need help answering any questions, you call the chapter, or you call me, or you call Kimberly. So elected officials are generally on at least, I would say that most of them are generally on at least Facebook and Twitter. Many are on Instagram and many are on Snapchat. It is entirely appropriate for you to ask a member, hey, are you on social media? Which social media platform do you use most frequently? And let's say you have a great interaction with your virtual advocacy. At the end of your meeting, say, hey, I was going to post about this on my social media and tag you. Would you be okay with that? I can't imagine they would not be okay with that, because guess what? Elected officials showing to the people that follow them that they've had meaningful interactions with their constituents looks good for them, and it looks good for you and the community. So it's a win-win. This is what I tell people all the time. People think about advocacy and they think about a protest or a demonstration or storming the Capitol. Strategic and successful advocacy can yield win-win outcomes. It can be a feel-good moment for everybody involved. It does not have to be adversarial. So keep that in mind. This is just a study of, this is members of Congress, that 99% of members of the House put at least one thing on Facebook. I think that was within the last week, and 100% of senators. And the interactions with social media have only intensified during the COVID pandemic. Keep in mind also that 2020 is a major election year. Every single member of Congress is up for election. As a result of that, in a normal year, they would be having multiple town halls already and throughout the summer months, because people generally make up their mind a few weeks before the November elections. We've heard many elected officials that have moved to having teletown halls or virtual roundtables. So seek those out and keep in mind that that's a great way to engage someone who's running for office, who's never been in office before, or somebody who needs a lot of votes to get reelected. They will want the support of their constituents, or I should say, they really should want as much support as they can garner from as many constituents as possible. So they're gonna want to be engaging with people. So take them up on that. There are other things that you can do year round. Some of these are probably more appropriate for when you're able to interact with folks in person. But I know the chapter has an advocacy committee that meets regularly on a monthly basis. Shar might be able to speak to, or Kathy could speak to, if folks want to get more engaged in that, what that might look like. There's always letter writing campaigns. There will probably not be opportunity to testify in person at committee hearings, but I was watching the news last night and the Senate had a Zoom hearing yesterday. So there might still be opportunity to provide testimony at committee deliberations. Keep in mind that going to the Capitol and meeting with elected officials is really important, but for all members of Congress at least, they also have district offices and you can go and meet with them there. Sometimes you get a little more time at a district visit, so keep that in mind as well. Other things that you can ask elected officials to do. So listen to and hear your story. When the time is appropriate, getting them to come and tour your local HTC can be really eye-opening for elected officials. When you're able to have a walk or a gala or any kind of a public event, invite elected officials to that. Again, they like to interact with the people that can vote them into office or vote for them to stay in office. So any kind of a public gathering is a great opportunity, but not now. I don't mean now. I mean when the time is appropriate down the road. The point here is that there are more things that you can ask them to do throughout the year. And again, if you find a strategic opportunity to engage them, it's good for you, but it's equally good for them. So keep that in mind. I'm going to talk very briefly about some Medicaid trends and what I think are some opportunities for you all as it pertains to Medicaid expansion. Now that the Affordable Care Act has allowed states to expand Medicaid to cover adults without children, we estimate about 30% of the bleeding disorders community now accesses their care through Medicaid. One of the trends that we're seeing are preferred drug list, where they're limiting access to all FDA-approved clotting factor and other novel therapies. We're not worried about that in North Carolina right now, but it is something that we've seen in other states. When that happens, there's usually a committee that meets and will hear public testimony, and we will encourage patients to go and talk about the access to the full array of FDA-approved products. And if that opportunity presents itself in North Carolina, we will walk through every step of the way with you. We've done it in many, many other states. We've also seen a lot of prior authorization policies that have been implemented. Again, preferred and non-preferred drug list. We've seen step therapy implemented, or what's called fail first, where you first have to access maybe one, maybe two products that are on this preferred list before you can get to the product that you need. And that's really problematic for the bleeding disorders community, because fail first for us doesn't mean an increase in blood pressure, right? It could mean a joint bleed, it could mean a brain bleed, it could mean something worse. So the fail first language is really problematic for us. And thankfully, we've got a lot of experience pushing back when those things have been proposed. Again, this is not something that you need to worry about in North Carolina now. I'm just giving you the context of some of what we've seen in the Medicaid space in other states. This map shows you all of the states that have expanded Medicaid. So everyone that's in orange has not, at least not yet, expanded Medicaid. One of the things that Charlene asked me to talk about was other states that have expanded Medicaid that are typically more conservative states. And unfortunately, the three most recent that did so are Nebraska and Utah and Idaho, but all of those were a ballot measure. The voters voted to expand Medicaid there. They are still having problem with implementation because the legislature is not fully on board. At least that's the case in Nebraska. I know less about Idaho and Utah. And there is at least one state at this point, Missouri, that has it as a ballot measure for this fall. But one of the things I wanted to make sure you all were thinking about as you're considering your efforts for the year is who is engaged, like who's on this call tonight, who's on the advocacy committee, and where do they live? Because in an ideal world, on your virtual advocacy day, you would have one constituent from every one of these Senate districts call their senator's office. At least one, I should be clear. The reason that's relevant is because sometimes elected officials will only take calls from people that are their constituents. It's not uncommon for people to say, oh, you're a constituent, where do you live? And you don't have to be too specific, but if you name the town or the village where you live, that's usually sufficient for them to take the call. But the elected officials get a lot of pressure from a lot of people. So they hear more, they listen more intently, and they're more likely to fight for you if you live in their district. So there's benefit to having geographic diversity, if you will, in the folks that you engage to contact their senator. Because again, ideally you would want to have somebody that has a connection to their senator in every one of the Senate districts. And look, I know that that's probably not feasible in the next couple of months. And this is something that I challenge all of my states to do. And all of them, it's a work in progress. But I wanted to offer that because I think that's one of the things that you can do to prepare yourself to be successful is to make sure you've got constituents in every one of the districts. That's the Senate. This is the House. We can get you these slides if you want them. Don't feel like you have to memorize it now. But again, the point is that you just want at least one family in every one of the districts. Finally, because of COVID, North Carolina is now allowing all voters to cast an absentee ballot. So if you want that, here's where you can access it. I think it's great that they're allowing absentee ballot, and I hope that you will encourage as many community members to vote as possible. As nonprofit organizations, we can't ever tell people who to vote for, but we can remind them that is their right and frankly their responsibility to vote on behalf of themselves and their family. And that is the extent of what I wanted to cover. Like Kimberly, I'm more than happy to take questions, or we can wait till after we hear from the senator. But thanks again for having me. It's good to be with you all.
Thank you, Nathan. And I do have at least one question. Again, others may come up in the chat box, but when you mentioned about all the senators being up for election or re-election, was that on the federal level or state level or both?
I don't know. The senator will know for North Carolina. I'm not sure, but that was for the House, the U.S. House. Everybody's up for the election, and a third of the Senate. I think many are up for re-election in North Carolina, but I don't know.
Okay, well, that is a good segue. So with that, I want to welcome Senator Jeff Jackson. He is in the North Carolina State Senate, District 37. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me. And I am up for re-election this year, as are every member of the North Carolina General Assembly. So the difference between us and the federal Congress is that not only are the members of our House up every 2 years, but the members of our Senate are also up every 2 years. Unlike US Senate, where you get a 6-year term, I only have a 2-year term. So we are all up. The entire North Carolina General Assembly is on the ballot basically every single election. We're up every 2 years, which is great from an advocacy standpoint, because it means you always get to put our feet to the fire. We always have to care what you think and what our constituents think. We don't get a big break there. And I want to talk about whatever y'all want to talk about and save as much time as possible for Q&A. Well, I just want to really say that y'all are in very good hands with Kimberly and Nathan. I had the chance to sit here with all of you and listen to their presentation. I was really impressed. I've heard some presentations like this, you know, a 101 on advocacy for state legislators, but this was probably the best one I've ever heard. I thought they both did an incredible job. If you just follow their advice, you're going to be fine. You don't need to hear from me. They've got this well in hand. They're pros. I'm really impressed. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I'll say one thing before we start. I want you all to picture advocacy, the timeline of advocacy for this cause in particular over the next 4 years. This is not a 6-month thing. This is a 4-year thing. One of the groups that did this very well was an advocacy group around autism. They had some changes that they wanted to make, and I saw them try and fail and try and fail and then try and succeed. And a lot of the issues that y'all are talking about are similar to some of those issues, the step therapy stuff in particular. So you have a real opportunity because of big bills that are going to pass because of COVID, right? Big bills that impact healthcare. You've got a big opportunity to get some things that you want in those bills. But you're going to see a lot of those bills passed over the next 3-4 years. And you're also going to see probably, maybe, some real changes in the makeup of the General Assembly itself. So if you don't get it this time around, you get another spin on this wheel after November. So think in terms of not just this term, but the next 2 terms, next 2-year terms as your legislative window of opportunity. And I think you're going to get a lot of stuff done. I think if I were you, I would be very optimistic about your ability to get a lot of things done for your group. Talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah. Oh, no, and that's a really great point. And I think especially we have some really seasoned advocates on the call, but we also have folks that this is their first advocacy introduction to advocacy in the bleeding disorders community. So I'll never forget, you know, one of the first times that I went down to DC and just feeling like it's just impossible, but it's a long-term thing. It doesn't just happen overnight, and I'm sure you see that as well. So I guess my first question to you would be, you know, it takes a while and it can be frustrating to see bills become law or see advocacy through into law. So why on your end, why did you get into politics? Because I'm sure it's frustrating on your end as well. What was it that drove you to become a senator?
I was an assistant district attorney, and in that job, you spend a lot of time sort of shoveling sand into the ocean, right? You are dealing with the net product of a lot of societal failures to invest in healthcare, education, economic development. And it was a good job. I mean, it's an honorable job, but for years I spent, you know, every day basically shoveling sand into the ocean thinking, if I ever get a chance to address the pile of sand, I would really like to do that. I've got some ideas on that. And then I got an opportunity very suddenly and unexpectedly to do that because my state senator was picked to become mayor of Charlotte. And then I got picked out of the blue to become a state senator. Nobody knew who I was. I wasn't even from Charlotte. I'd never run for political office before. I didn't really know any elected officials. And within like a 6-week period, I went from, you know, just being an assistant DA who no one had ever heard of to being a state senator from Charlotte. And what was great about that was as soon as I got there, all these people, exactly like your group, sort of all wanted to meet because, hey, there's a new state senator. Let's pitch him on our number one most important thing and see if we can make it his number one most important thing. And you get an amazing education about the state and its culture and its economy and issues like this that I didn't know anything about, right? I knew nothing about issues like this. There are a handful of disease advocacy groups that have given me virtually 100% of the education that I have about that issue came from those groups. And I can remember the words that were said by some of those advocates in some of those meetings in my office where they really made a connection with me. They come in and at first they seem the same because they're coming in 15-minute increments. And the last guy wanted to talk about asphalt and the next guy wants to talk about solar panels, all right? But this person wants to talk about a disease that she has or that her child has and look me in the eye and tell me, this law could either help or hurt me and my child. And that hits like a ton of bricks. That's what gives your advocacy group so much power, because you get the head and you get the heart.
And that brings me to my next question. It's a good segue. What is the best part about your job, would you say?
The best part about the job is there are a few days a year that make the whole job worth it, because there are a few days a year where you actually get something done that you've been working on all year. It's the kind of job where one good day has to outweigh 100 bad days, because you're going to have 100 bad days. So the same advice I gave to you about you have to sort of expand your timeline of success, that's advice I give to myself and other new legislators when they come on board. It took me 5 years to get a bill passed that just passed recently, last year, and it passed. It wound up passing unanimously, right? There wasn't even any fight about it. 5 years to pass a unanimous bill that costs no money. So I live your pain every day. But when you win, when you finally get something done, makes it all worth it. And sometimes you go from failure to victory in the span of 15 minutes. One conversation and everything changes.
Great point. And so right now, with everything going on, how are y'all voting? I know it differs in each state and what their constitution says. So I'm just curious, with North Carolina, how are y'all managing to vote on things?
They've spread us all out on the Senate floor. So normally we have assigned seats. And what they did was they now skip a person and they put those people around the edges. Usually staff sits around the edges, and now senators chosen more or less at random, I guess, are sitting around the edges. And they just redid our main conference room, our main committee room. We used to sit in this committee room like right next to each other, and now we're all sitting 6 feet away. You'll see pictures of it. It's like they went with the dark wood, like the fake mahogany wood paneling all around. It's a completely different look than the 1970s kitchen aesthetic that it had before.
It's going to be hard to go back to the way things were.
Yeah.
What is the most challenging part of being a senator through the COVID-19 crisis?
Not being able to shake hands with a constituent, not being able to be in the same room with someone who you're trying to help. The failure of DES to get people their unemployment insurance has been excruciatingly painful, because I have constituents calling me with tears in their eyes, like mothers and fathers, proud parents, desperate for help, and they can't get a goddamn person to answer the phone. And that's been the most frustrating part of this whole thing.
I could see that. And especially there's only so much you can do, so. And then switching gears.
We can do more.
And so switching gears, we have a question about what do you think might be the pathway to success with the Medicaid expansion bill? Do you think we need to target any committee specifically?
The Medicaid expansion bill is there's a narrow version of that has a real chance of passing. And it's sort of in negotiations right now between House leadership and Senate leadership. And I think the sticking point is whether or not it will include COVID treatment. But it's a very narrow bill. It's not Medicaid expansion in the normal sense. But I think it's a very high chance, I would say 75%, that some form of a narrow Medicaid expansion bill passes, and a 0% chance that the full Medicaid expansion bill passes, which is deeply unfortunate. That's for this year, a 0% chance for this year. We will see about next year.
And that was actually one of my questions, that right now it seems like some individuals in the North Carolina Senate have argued that we don't need to expand Medicaid because the federal government is covering COVID-19 medical expenses, according to what the government is saying. But what about the people that are unemployed and or uninsured with medical needs outside of COVID-19?
Right. What about the hundreds of thousands of people who just lost their job and therefore their health insurance basically by state policy? These people who did nothing wrong. and they're now without health insurance in the middle of a pandemic? Or what about when it would cost us $0 at this point to expand Medicaid and bring $4 billion into the state during the deepest recession that North Carolina will ever have? This is what we're about to go through. There is no reason not to do it at this point.
I agree. Another question. You have been terrific with your newsletter during COVID-19. We are stunned that Medicaid expansion hasn't happened with COVID-19. Nothing to do with catching the virus, but everything to do with folks losing their jobs and or their job-based health insurance due to COVID. This seems like a no-brainer. What the heck is going on with Republican legislators not understanding this?
I
Can
love
you shed some light on
no-brainer. I refer to this as the mother of all no-brainers. It was a no-brainer a couple of years ago, but now it's like the mother of all no-brainers. Here's the secret about Medicaid expansion and what's happening. Medicaid expansion is unanimously popular in the General Assembly, in private, behind closed doors, unanimously popular. They understand perfectly well. That's why you don't see them in front of TV cameras making the case, making an argument against it anymore, because they're all for it. They're just worried what will happen in a Republican primary if someone runs against them and an outside group sends 20 pieces of mail with that Republican's face next to Obama's face, and they're toast. That's what this is about. It's about 20 pieces of mail that would run in a Republican primary.
And knowing that advocating for a specific issue is a lengthy process, how frequently would you suggest that a constituent follow up with their representative on an issue that they're concerned about?
If the issue is alive and in play, if there is a pending bill and that bill is moving through committee and being heard, then to me, there is no limit for how many times you should be in touch with someone. You should be in touch as needed. I have really benefited from advocates letting me know, hey, a bill just changed in committee in the House. There was a sentence that was taken out or a sentence that was put in. I through the process of getting to know advocates as bills move, some of those advocates develop a lot of credibility with me. So when they come to me and they say something bad just happened to our bill, then I'm going to stop what I'm doing and listen to them. But if it's not a live issue, if there is no bill pending, if we're not in session, then pace yourself, right? Otherwise, you're going to be repeating yourself because there's not going to be anything new to say. I guess that would be a good standard, right? Be in touch as often as you can without repeating yourself.
That's great. I'm from a very liberal district. How can I advocate for Medicaid expansion?
There is only one practical way to advocate for Medicaid expansion, and it doesn't involve Medicaid expansion or advocating for Medicaid expansion at all. We got to flip 5 seats. If we flip 5 seats, we'll get Medicaid expansion. If we flip 4 seats, we won't. That's it. It's not a persuasion issue. It's an electoral issue. Got to flip 5 seats.
If I can answer that question, I mean, I don't know the politics of what's going on in North Carolina, so I couldn't speak to that, though that seems logical. But one of the things I tell folks that will say, well, my members already support it. My members already signed on to this piece of legislation. Like, why do I need to call them? And what I would encourage you to do in scenarios like that is to, number one, say thank you and say, we know you're supportive of this and we're incredibly appreciative of it. Who else do you think we need to talk to? Or what committee chair do we need to target? Or what kind of a messenger do we need to send in? Like, the nice thing about the diversity of the bleeding disorders community is we've got people of all ages, races, political persuasions. We have babies that can be effective advocates. Like, there's different ways to approach other people that you might need to garner their support. So if someone's already supportive, don't think that that means the door is closed. You should still say thank you and ask them for their advice, like we've done tonight with the senator. What else do we need to do?
Yeah, and going back to Nathan's map, you know, we've got a lot of territory to cover with being a statewide organization, and individuals all over our state are impacted by the lack of expansion. So I would also encourage you, even if, you know, you have a senator or representative that is supportive, reach out to us, and maybe you can help us to provide outreach to others in different parts of the state that we really need to focus on more. How do we encourage legislators who do not publicly support Medicaid expansion to change their mind, or is it just not going to happen until we vote them out?
Don't bother. Don't bother. There's nothing, you don't have any leverage on them greater than their district, their seat, right? So they interpret that publicly supporting that as losing a primary. You don't have anything that you can leverage over them that's greater than that fear. So you just got to flip 5 seats. There's no advocacy angle on this. There's only an electoral angle on Medicaid expansion.
Yeah, and I think we've seen quite the quite the couple last year. We've seen quite a lot over the past couple of years with those that either are for or against. It doesn't seem like there's many on the fence at this point. So that's a good point. And then, is the General Assembly working on anything besides legislation surrounding COVID-19, or is that kind of the sole focus right now?
Well, we didn't pass a budget last year, so we should still do that, right? Only the problem is we're waiting to see if we're going to get more money from the federal government, because if we have to pass a budget right now, it's going to have major cuts everywhere, because the estimate is we're $4 billion short and the budget's $24 billion. If you take $4 billion out of a $24 billion budget, you're looking at some serious cuts. So we're hoping and praying that the federal government gets it together and sends a relief check to the states. Because, like, again, this is not like fiscal irresponsibility on the part of the state of North Carolina. We just caught a pandemic, right? So that's going to be a really big question. I don't think it's going to get settled in the next month or two, maybe late summer. And yeah, look, we're all going to be filing bills that don't have anything to do with COVID. I'll be filing a bill for independent redistricting, because that's what I do. And I probably have a bill for early childhood education, because that's another issue that I am an advocate on, which, by the way, I became an advocate on when advocates from the early childhood community came to me and opened my mind to the possibility of that issue. I didn't know squat about early childhood until folks like yourself came into my office and started talking to me about it and teaching me about it.
And so, speaking of constituents, are you meeting with constituents at this time? And if so, how are you doing that?
So what I decided to do, and I started this about 3 weeks ago, I call 100 constituents a day and check in on them. And it takes about 2.5 hours. And those calls are hard, because some people are doing okay. Some people are sort of floating above this because they worked for banks and they were already working remotely, or it's just no big deal. And some people have just been absolutely hammered. There are people who really need a lot of help.
So on June 16th, if we were to have constituents of yours that wanted to meet, would you be open to meeting with them, either by Zoom or phone calls? Are they options for you?
I mean, the way I see it, Charlene, that's my job. I don't really get to say no to an offer like that. That's my job. If you say, I have a group of your constituents and they want to talk to you, I don't really get to say no unless I'm in an ambulance on the way to the hospital.
And they might get to meet your kids too.
They probably will. It's a package deal when you want to talk to me.
Oh, and unless there's any others in the chat, I don't see any, but feel free. I would say my last question, going back to Nathan's point about connecting and making sure that, we're keeping up with what you're doing. How can we connect with you, Senator? I know you have a really good Facebook presence. I follow you on there.
Get a hold of. I'm too easy. Like, you can send me a Facebook message or a Twitter DM or an Instagram message or a Reddit message. I'm not on Snapchat. It was either Kimberly or Nathan who were like, yes, politicians on Snapchat. I was on Snapchat for like 3 days 2 years ago, and I got weirded out. It was just me and a bunch of like young teenagers. My constituents aren't asking for me to be on Snapchat. So I also have normal.
What about TikTok?
What?
I know Kimberly was talking about she's waiting for
TikTok.
someone to make.
I've thought about it. I've thought about it. I'm not there yet. My 11-year-old, he lives for TikTok. We have to restrict the phone just because of the TikTok app on the phone. He wanted to go up on the roof and do trick shots with the basketball yesterday. And my wife and I had to talk about like we appreciate that he's trying to generate content, but like it's creative, but no. I'm thinking about it. Maybe I'll get back to you on TikTok.
All right. Well, we'll follow you and we'll find out. So,
Okay.
All right. With that, so I'll wrap it up. I just want to really, again, a special thank you to Kimberly, to Nathan, to Senator Jackson for joining us tonight. And then also for helping us to be able to strengthen our advocacy efforts on behalf of the bleeding disorders community. We appreciate everyone who was able to join tonight and those that weren't because of their schedules but are watching this recording. You know, we're only as strong as the community that we have and the voices that are out there sharing their stories. So we hope to see you on June 10th at 7 p.m. for our next advocacy webinar, where we're going to focus more specifically on Medicaid expansion. And please also save the date for our virtual legislative day on June 16th. Again, more details for both of those events are going to come. And we're also going to make sure that we send you guys a special email once the registration opens. And we appreciate your time and thank you. Have a good rest of the evening.
Take care.
Thank you, Charlene and everyone.